So today's presentation and discussion was about checking in with yourself and your students, and it's really just intended to be a helpful tool if you're stuck with how do you talk to your students or how do you start the dialogue. That obviously may be a very difficult one, and just really some tips on how to best navigate that. So it's basically some communication skills. In the first spot, we want to address how do we show our students that we care about them. So I just put out some just very simple communication skills that help students know that we care about them and they don't feel judged. One of the most important things is to come from a place of genuine concern. I think that too often we try to approach somebody because we feel like we need to, and it's not necessarily coming from a positive place or a place where we are genuinely feel that we want to reach out to them. And I feel like we all feel that. So students are going to notice whether you're reaching out to them out of obligation or if you're actually concerned. So it's important to kind of take your own temperature about why you're talking to the students or what's bringing you to start that dialogue. Try to use, as best as you can, non-judgmental language. So try to, as best you can, even if you are really concerned about the student, to not judge their experience. There's so much that goes up behind the scenes of students' life that we don't have all of that information. So trying to stay as non-judgmental as possible is going to allow that student to open up with you and feel that the engagement is much more open and safe, and then they might open up more than they would have otherwise. And that kind of ties in with that next point of being a safe person the student can come to. So I know we obviously all have obligations in which, like if we're a Title IX reporter, that may look a little different. But I mean more in lines of using that non-judgmental language, trying to watch our body language, making sure that we're not active aggressively towards the student. That could be in our body language, it could be in the tone that we're using. There's a lot of ways that communicate whether we're a safe person to talk to. It could be in eye contact. It could just be even in the way that we approach somebody. In another way that you can be a safe person is to, without assuming that you know, just ask open-ended questions and being mindful of the impact of your word choice. So that's so important. In opening that dialogue is to make sure that you're choosing language and words that feel non-judgmental, feel non-aggressive, give the student a space to talk to. We hinted on this a little bit, but don't make assumptions about what the student is struggling with. All too often, I think students will come to us, especially at the counseling center, and say, my professor wasn't flexible, or they weren't willing to work with me, and they didn't even stop to ask like what was going on or what the reason was. It was just very, very blunt. So don't ever make assumptions, because a lot of our college students are struggling with a lot that again isn't on the surface and isn't necessarily reflected outwardly all the time. So it's okay to ask what's going on, and ask again as non-judgmentally as you can. But if you don't know, don't just assume. It's important also to know your own limitations and what your strengths and abilities are. So if something seems like it's too much for you, it's better that you don't do it, or know the resources of someone that can help. So nobody expects you to be an expert in all areas. Nobody expects you to be a therapist to these students. Nobody expects you to be a medical doctor. It's really important to be able to monitor what your experiences are and also what you can be helpful with. I think sometimes we try, because we feel discomfort, we want to try to like cross those boundaries and help, because ultimately when you're working with college students, you want to help the best way you can. But it's also sometimes that can do more harm than good if we try to help outside of our limits. And then also, if we're taking care of others, we also have to make sure we're taking care of ourselves. That's just as important. So we need to sometimes check in with ourselves and see, are we doing any self-care? And are the self-care that we're doing, is it effective? So a lot of the students that I'm working with and even my colleagues, a lot of the discussion has been, I used to know what was effective for me. I used to have this list of things that I would do for self-care. And now with the pandemic, I'm not able to do those things, whether those things may not be open anymore. They're just not as effective as they used to be. So sometimes you have to get really creative. And that's one of the things I work with students about of, okay, we may have known what worked before, but now times are very different. You might have to get a little creative and kind of check in what's working, what's not working, what seems to be at least alleviating some stress. And always know and giving yourself permission to feel it's okay to know if you're feeling drained or exhausted. We all have felt that from time to time. And for me, frankly, through most of the pandemic. So it's okay to kind of check in with yourself and realize when you're feeling drained and exhausted. And just like we mentioned at the top of the presentation, to know your own strengths and abilities. And so if it's beyond the point of your normal exhaustion or drain level, then we also need to, just like we would do with our students, get our own support and our own help. So lean into those supports if you need it. It's okay to delegate. It's okay to ask your team members for support. It's okay to get your own help. Whether that looks like therapy, whether that looks like just reaching out for friends and finding a way to have a Zoom chat once a week, just something that you do that is kind of refilling your own glass. Check in with, this goes in with the effective self-care, but check in with how you're managing your stress. I always like to take kind of a body scan. Are my shoulders hunched? Do I feel tight? Am I having a lot of headaches? Just kind of like checking in that we're actually doing something to manage our stress. Sometimes I think we put our own needs to the back burner to serve others. And just like it's okay to feel exhausted, it's also okay, and we need to take care of ourselves. It's also okay to give ourselves permission to be good enough until we can be better. So sometimes it's in the expectations and the standards that we set for ourselves. It's okay that if you're not where you were before, I don't think any of us are. So it's okay to be gentle and kind. And one of the themes that I work with a lot of my students is working on being compassionate and kind with themselves, and allowing themselves to have different expectations. And it's okay for us as the older adults in their lives to model that too.